everybody. Welcome back to LA Not So Confidential. This is Dr. Scott. I'm here with my bestie,
Dr. Shiloh. We're at episode 38.
Crazy. That's just so crazy.
It is crazy. And today we are offering the ever elusive LA Not So Confidential interview.
It happens every once in a while.
Once in a blue moon.
And I think that's the amazing thing is that we get...
Well, we're picky and choosy about who we say, yeah, we'll do an interview for that person. Not that, people are clamoring to do interviews with us. That's not what I meant.
No, but then again, we did get, something that was only barely related to true crime and forensics. I mean, it was...
Yeah.
And it was one that we were like, I don't think that's...
Oh, right. The one that we said we weren't going to do. But yes, we choose wisely, I think. And the one that we're bringing you today actually stemmed way back from when we did our highway serial killer episode. And I briefly mentioned this case, and the wonderful individual that we're talking with today reached out to us and said, hey, thanks for the mention. And so we just kept in touch after that because we knew that we absolutely wanted to talk with him.
Yeah, this is one of those examples where, somebody reaches out to us and we're like, oh, how cool. Somebody, is acknowledging us. And then you go and you read their bio and you're like, holy shit.
Right.
We had Fitz. We had... Jen Haley, and now Robert Kolker. I mean, that's the big reveal. So Dr. Shiloh and I are incredibly honored and excited to have as a guest today on LA Not So Confidential the New York Times best-selling author Robert Kolker. His book, Lost Girls, was named one of the New York Times 100 notable books and one of Publishers Weekly's top 10 books of 2013. Lost Girls is a literary account of the lives and deaths of 5 Craigslist sex workers whose bodies were found in the Gilgo and Oak Beach areas of Long Island in 2010.
But as intrepid young reporter Robert Kolker discovered, the truth about these women went far deeper than common assumptions. The victims weren't outcasts, they weren't kidnapped or enslaved. All came from a slice of America ignored by politicians and the media. The poor, often rural and white parts of the country hit hard by economics, where limited opportunities forced people to make hard choices. Choices that led them to places like Gilgo Beach.
Robert's prolific work extends far beyond this award-winning novel. His pieces have appeared in New York Magazine, Bloomberg Businessweek, the New York Times Magazine, Wired, GQ, O Magazine, and Men's Journal, often taking the form of reported narratives. His 2006 investigation into the sexual abuse within the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community helped bring an abuser to justice and was nominated for a National Magazine Award. His exploration of an 18-year-old murder exoneration case and the police tactics that can lead to false confessions received the Harry Frank Guggenheim 2011 Excellence in Criminal Justice Reporting Award.
By the mid-1970s, 6 of the 10 Galvin boys, one after another, were diagnosed as schizophrenic. What took place on Hidden Valley Road was so extraordinary that the Galvins became one of the first families to be studied by the National Institute of Mental Health. In a tour de force of narrative nonfiction, award-winning journalist Robert Kolker, author of the best-selling Lost Girls, tells the intimate story of the Galvins alongside the epic tale of science's quest to uncover the true nature of a mystifying disease.
Of course, Dr. Shiloh and I, as forensic psychologists, also coming from a solid clinical training background, are fascinated by Robert's upcoming work. In the Galvin family, each mentally ill brother emerges as a whole individual with remarkably different expressions of the same neurological mental health disorder. The Galvin story crests in a breakthrough that, thanks to their unique DNA, offers hope of eliminating schizophrenia forever. Hidden Valley Road is a captivating medical mystery and a heartbreaking drama, but above all, it's an unforgettable lesson in what it means to be a family. Please look for Hidden Valley Road coming from Doubleday Publishers in April 2020, and we're going to be talking to Robert just in a few minutes, but we're so excited to have him back in the future about this particular subject as well. So, thanks for tuning in, and welcome to our interview with Robert Kolker.
Well, welcome to LA Not So Confidential.
Welcome.
This is Dr. Shiloh, and I'm here with
Dr. Scott.
And we are so happy that we have author Robert Kolker joining us today. Thanks for being on, Bob.
Thank you, guys. It's great to talk to you.
Yes, we have been in contact for just about a year, so we thank you so much for staying in the loop with us and really trying to figure out what would be perfect timing for us to connect, because obviously we've been aware of your work for a long time and it feels like a real natural fit with some of the topics that we've been doing lately.
And I feel like even though I've not been directly in contact with you, I've been watching all of your interviews over and over again. So I'm like, right. Oh, I know. I've been talking to Bob for this entire time.
So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little overview of the Long Island serial killer case right now, just to give folks an idea of a timeline, because it can be quite confusing. Okay, so we want to give you a good idea of a timeline of these crimes and murders and when this all came to light. So really what kicks this off is when Shannan Gilbert goes missing. And Shannan was a 23-year-old sex worker, and May 1st, 2010, she is really essentially last seen running out into the darkness after leaving a John's house, and she's extremely scared, extremely agitated, can't be calmed down, and both the John and her driver just have zero idea what's happening, and it looks like she is just terrified of them. And this happens in a very quiet community, a closed off community called Oak Beach in Long Island, and that's really what sort of starts unfolding this entire mystery. So later on, December 2010, Suffolk County PD, one of their canine officers, is essentially doing some routine training along Ocean Parkway. And this time, Shannan's still missing. But this canine ends up finding 4 bodies wrapped in burlap along the roadway in the marsh area, very, very near Oak Beach. So these 4 women are really the women that Robert Kolker is highlighted in his book, and their names are Maureen, Megan, Melissa, and Amber. But with their discovery, the story just got started. Definitely did not end there. So I think a very interesting piece to this is that it turns out 2 of those women went missing before Shannan and 2 went missing after Shannan. So in March and in April the following year, 2011, 4 more bodies and or remains are found, again, along this stretch of Ocean Parkway. The police end up expanding their search up into Nassau County. Other partial remains are found. There's some link to remains found years earlier in other parts of the state. Finally, in December of 2011, Shannan's remains are found in a marsh about a half a mile from where she disappeared. And really, up until this point, police have maintained that she drowned and or died from the elements and was not a victim of clearly, what is a serial killer and or killers, depending on who you speak with and what theories are out there. So this is a very complicated story, and I think there's a lot of angles from which someone who's writing an article or a book about this could take. But we really found your take, Bob, very interesting and significant in kind of talking about where true crime is and what we're talking about when we do want to tell these stories. Your book, Lost Girls, was released in July of 2013. And so with that whole setup, I want to sort of back up a tad to say, really see, as a writer and a journalist, what kind of stories do you feel like you're drawn to, and how has that included and or progressed to true crime?
Thanks. Well, and thank you again for the chance to talk about the case in this context, because I think it's the victims of the case who really quite often in cases like these get overlooked, and it's really all we have to look at the moment in the Long Island serial killer case, and that restriction actually winds up helping us understand all this case and other cases like it in a new way. And that's what I appreciated about the opportunity to report on this case. I had been a New York Magazine staff writer for almost 15 years when the first 4 sets of human remains were found on along Ocean Parkway. That was in December of 2010. And by that point, I developed, a sort of expertise in crime writing and in narrative nonfiction writing. But the privilege of being at New York Magazine was it was the sort of place where, more often than not, the stories I was writing weren't just supposed to be yarns that you were spinning to entertain the audience. They also had to have something at stake in the background, whether it was a legal question or an issue of controversy in the forensic psychology world. It was always something sort of bubbling in the background. And so as I would be writing these stories, it would be unclear at the beginning whether the story would be about the 90% about the issue and 10% about the case, or 90% about the case and 10% about the issue. And that kind of freedom was really, I really appreciated it. There are very few places that really allowed you to get to something slightly deeper as you're reporting on a live news story.
Sure.
And with this news story, it was anybody's guess how to report on it. I mean, I was one guy at one magazine, and when those first 4 women's remains were found along Ocean Parkway, nobody knew about Shannon Gilbert and how she was still missing. And once it became clear that she was still missing and that they thought there might be a 5th victim, and every news outlet was descending onto Oak Beach to report on the case, I thought to myself, what on earth could I possibly have to contribute here? I mean, I had no sources in the Suffolk County Police Department at the time. I worked in Manhattan.
You weren't Nancy Grace at the time, who was all over it, right?
Right. But the other thing I thought was, just to take readers back to that time, this was about, if I recall, I think it was about 18 months or maybe even less since the Craigslist killer case up in New England.
Oh, right.
Where they had solved a mystery very quickly just by tracing the digital trail of the guy who hired the victim. They found him right away. And so the first thing I thought when I heard about those 4 sets of remains was, well, they're going to find this guy 4 times as fast as they found the last one, because it's 4 different women with 4 digital trails. Sure. And they'll just, they'll sew this up completely. I really thought that by the time I got in the car and made it halfway out there, the mystery would be solved. And that was, of course, the complete opposite of what happened. There was no solution to this mystery. And then there was another assumption I made that turned out to be completely wrong, which was that we would never learn who those 4 women were. The police said they were female and that they were presumed to be escorts. And immediately what I thought of was what we know, what we see in the popular culture about victims in crimes like this. They're sort of the extras or the plot devices in the drama where you're hunting for the serial killer.
Absolutely.
You'll never know their names. They were trafficked from another place and another world. They've been off the grid for years, addicted to drugs, divorced from their families. And that turned out to be completely the opposite of reality too. These women were identified within a month, and their families were notified. And it turned out their families had been in close touch with these women up until the minute they disappeared. All of them, without exception. All 4 of them. And Shannon was the same way. She had just been on the phone with her mother a few hours before she disappeared. She had been texting her.
So, Bob, I wanted to jump in and ask you. I think that's a fascinating perspective you just offered us on your assumptions about how quickly it was going to be resolved because of the digital trail that was left by the Craigslist killer. I remember I think it was the 3rd episode of the documentary, they talk about
the A&E documentary.
Yes, the A&E documentary. One of the things that's commented on is that many of these women were pretty facile with having multiple cell phones, multiple numbers, and in order to protect themselves legally so that they couldn't be traced by the police. Do you think that had anything to do with making this more complex?
Yes. I mean, I think with some of these women, they had left their phones at home, and so the police had access to whatever phones they thought they owned, but the women owned more than one phone. So who knows
Okay.
who and when they were talking to someone. And presumably, and again, the police haven't given us information, presumably the police have, looked up at least some of the Johns who show up on their phones. But that apparently has led nowhere. I mean, it's been 7 years. So that it, since the book came out, and even longer since their bodies were found. But the other issue here is that Craigslist and Backpage were kind of low-tech ways to hire an escort. You go on the website, you scroll, and you never click. You just see someone's picture and see what they write, and you see their phone number, and then you just call the phone number on your phone. So there's really nothing on your computer except the fact that you've been scrolling on Craigslist in that category to demonstrate that you have a digital trail. So that end of it is kind of a dead end as well.
Absolutely. So part one of your book is dedicated really to telling the stories of these women who became victims, and not only telling their stories, but you're telling the stories of their mothers. And why was it important for you to go back a couple of generations really for some of these women in order to shape how your audience was going to view them?
Well, there are some true crime books that I would count among my favorites that are not whodunits. They are more portraits of a world where crime takes place, but that it's in the backdrop of a sociological issue or question. David Simon's really good at this. In the books that he wrote or co-wrote before he made The Wire, Homicide and The Corner. And then there's Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, who wrote a book called Random Family, where she spent 10 years with welfare mothers in the Bronx. They were married to drug dealers or not married. They were having kids with them. There was criminality going on all the time. It was sort of a life in the underworld, but it was through the eyes of these women. And that was a huge influence on me. And then there's There Are No Children Here, which is a very famous book by Alex Kotlowitz, which followed two boys growing up in the projects in Chicago, getting in and out of trouble, but also trying to have a life. And I thought that's the sort of book that I would like to write one day, a book that sort of lifts the veil on a part of society that most readers don't get to see, and sort of helps you understand the context of something that you really might have waved off or discounted before. And as soon as I got to know these family members and saw how no one had been paying attention to them since their loved one disappeared, I knew that those stories were worth telling. I mean, for instance, there's Maureen Brainerd Barnes from Connecticut. She disappeared in 2007. That's 3 years before her remains were found. It took 2 of those years for her family to even get Maureen's name on the National Registry of Missing Persons.
Wow.
No cop really cared enough to make that happen for them. They all assumed that she had just sort of fallen off the grid. It was that.
Wow.
Only when it became part of some larger serial killer case and it felt like an episode at SVU did the world care, did the police snap into action. And that, I thought, was something that, I could really shine a light on in a book like this.
Absolutely.
So that's to answer your question, that's why I wanted to learn the family stories. You would get to know them, get to know the women, help the reader understand, not necessarily agree with every decision that the women made, but see their rationale and understand how, for them, escorting actually was solving all of their problems until, of course, it created more problems for them.
Right. I know you really give us a great view into how prevalent the drug use is. I think back to when you're talking about the one escort company that a couple of the girls worked for, and just the progression of it going from a little bit of a party favor or, to give them some
just a boost to get through the night.
To get through the night, and just how debilitating it became. I don't know. I think this is more just a comment of highlighting like how well that was done. But then it also, I know for Dr. Scott and I, and in our work that we've seen with individuals with comorbid disorders like substance abuse and possibly, mood disorder, psychotic disorder, of how that could play out very much in what Shannon was exhibiting that night. It lends to the information just of what happened here, and that the drug use is really prevalent, and it could be a huge factor in no matter how much you protect yourself by having, different phones or having a driver, that really is going to put someone in danger.
And I really, really, really liked your development of the profiles of these victims, and you state the facts of the drug use, but it doesn't become the main part of the narrative. And I think that's so valuable, because even though we're talking about it being a vital part, probably, especially in Shannon's death, I mean, our perspective is because we have worked with individuals with significant substance use issues. But I like how that didn't have to take front and center in your book, so that we really get a more human feel of each of the victims. I thought that was just really well done.
Thanks. Yeah, that was another awakening for me, another assumption that was wiped away by reporting on this case. When I thought about escorts who might be targeted by violence, I would think, well, they were drug addicts, and so they became escorts in order to, help get drugs. But it turns out it's the other way around.
Right.
They turned to escorting as a means of social mobility. Like, they looked at the problems in their lives, the financial anxieties they had, and they saw people working 3 jobs at the Walmart and the Dunkin' Donuts and, the Lowe's. And then they looked at their phones, and they saw that they could post an ad and they could make as much money in a week as their friends were making in a month.
Sure.
And then the drugs come later, at least in the cases that I wrote about. I wonder in your work if that's what you guys have seen as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would agree, but I wanted to just jump back to something you just said, which I think is so vital. Using the term social mobility is so integral to this entire story and this particular population of women and men who work in sex work, is that, like you're saying, instead of working, just barely scraping by in these minimum wage jobs, to see this opportunity to triple, quadruple that in so much less time, while that quickly becomes an option for people, they may not necessarily be prepared. There's an evolution that happens as you maybe your career moves up, even if it's blue collar versus white collar. As you make slowly more money, you adjust to that and you learn how to be responsible. It almost, I can't help but wonder that in some way these women were like sort of in the position of lottery winners who suddenly have just access to all this cash, but don't really know how to manage it. Because one of the things that you describe in the book is like the self-gratification of the shopping trips, because this allowed these young women to, treat themselves and buy things for themselves that they never had that option before because they didn't have access to that kind of money. So that was another structural point that I found really helpful in your book. And then jumping back to the drug issue, is that in so many of the cases that Shiloh, I mean, even when you were in law enforcement, you would see this. When I worked strictly in community mental health, we would see this where, especially when you talk about crystal meth, it literally changes people's personality, and so much more rapidly than any other substance. And now it's not necessarily in the multiple YouTube documentaries and the A&E documentary and your book, you mentioned sort of a spectrum of drugs, but do you have any sense of like what the percentages was it seems like it was more stimulants than anything else, which would of course be cocaine and crystal meth and maybe some others, but did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the function of the drugs for some of them was to be able to keep working. So yeah, cocaine was in there, but then I think there was an escapist element to the drugs as well too, to sort of check out. It seems like Shannon drank a lot, and and certainly, and Amber had a heroin addiction at the end. Just sort of, divorce yourself from any of the troubles in your life.
Right.
So I think it's from my small sample set, those seem to be the things motivating the drug use.
Do you have any idea of whether or not when Shannon's remains were found, there was any way to do any kind of tox screen on her remains to determine what had been most recently in her system?
Well, she had been out in the elements for 18 months before they found her. Okay. So whatever tox screen they did was hampered by time and by exposure.
Okay.
They found no evidence of anything.
But then they also didn't test for everything either. Is that correct? Is that what?
I beg your pardon?
I believe, I thought her mother had said that they also didn't test for everything.
Right, it's true.
So that was a suspicious sort of.
The screen was limited.
Right.
First of all, they couldn't really test for alcohol. My understanding is alcohol is the first thing to disappear from physical evidence from remains. But then they checked for cocaine, but they didn't check for anything else. Okay. As my, off the top of my head, what I remember. At any rate, yes, it was. They did kind of a limited work on her remains, and the reason for that, if there is a reason beyond incompetence, is that they had at that point assumed that Shannon wasn't linked to the other victims. That quite coincidentally, she had died accidentally while the killer was killing other women.
Right.
And we can debate whether or not that's true or not, but what it meant was that the autopsy really wasn't as extensive as it might have been.
It's such a loss. I think one of the things that brought that up for Shiloh and I is, going back to that example of overuse of a stimulant is really one of the quickest ways to push someone into a bipolar break if they have a propensity or already have an existing diagnosis for bipolar disorder, or if you have absolutely no impairment, but you use enough stimulants, you can have a brief psychotic break, which certainly, it just sounded so familiar, the description of her really becoming just scared and terrified,
hiding behind the couch
and paranoid that she was being, that they were trying to kill her. And then the long 911 call, which the audio has not been released of that, right? So, although that's, I guess, why we're asking if there was any additional information about particular substances, because that particular picture, the way it's painted in the documentaries and in the book, it feels like a substance-induced psychotic disorder is what we would call it.
Bob, do you share a public opinion about what you think happened with Shannon?
The two possibilities are exactly as you painted. It could be exactly what Dr. Scott just described, a psychotic break that's been triggered, but that she was vulnerable to having for a long time. Or she could have been legitimately terrified for her life by something that the John had done or something else that had happened in the John's house. And then she went running, convinced that people were trying to kill her.
Right.
Or a combination of those two.
Yeah, or a combination of those two. The one thing that I really been saying publicly about this case is that there are a lot of neighbors who would know a lot more than what they're saying about what they saw that night. Because the weirdest thing about Shannon's disappearance is that she went knocking on doors and screaming throughout the neighborhood, and we know for a fact that many neighbors saw her, but then at a certain point, the information about what happens to her completely stops. And the next thing you know, they find her 18 months later, not so far from where she was last seen, in the depths of a marsh that was right next to the street where she was last seen. And so the question is, what did they see that they aren't talking about? Because nobody says, I saw her wadding into the marsh. And yet everybody was presumably talking to one another and responding to what was going on that morning. In particular, there's a local doctor who everybody called whenever there was the slightest bit of emergency. If anybody had a hangnail on Oak Beach, they called this doctor. Shannon was screaming right around the corner from his house. The neighbors who we know saw her were good friends of his. He was in town. He apparently called Shannon's mother within days of her disappearance. Everything points to him knowing more about what happened to her that morning, but he claims not to have seen her at all.
Yeah,
even though he told his mother something different, but he claims that.
Right.
Dr. Hackett is probably the most interesting and disturbing character to me in this entire. I don't know if he's a red herring and an easy character to sort of, have all of these suspicions and have sort of weave these wild stories about, because he is such an interesting sensation seeker, compulsive liar, whatever we want to call him. But yeah, to me, that's just one piece that I would love to dive more into.
And I think there was in the A&E documentary, there were several people that commented that exact same thing, that he was someone that wanted to be at the center of attention or wanted to be in the middle of things.
Well, and you sat down with him, right, Bob?
I did. I talked with him personally just a day or two before Shannon's remains were found.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, it was peculiar speaking with him because he had already admitted to having given the wrong information to the press earlier about when he talked to Shannon Gilbert's mother, whether he called her at all. He admitted that he wasn't telling the truth about that. And then when I sat down and talked to him, he told the same falsehood again until I corrected him and said, but you just told CBS News the opposite. And he said, oh, yeah, I did. So I was definitely talking with somebody who was sort of a natural dissembler. And that's something that I had heard about him from neighbors and even friends saying who were fond of him, but said that he liked to tell stories.
Sure.
What was less clear in talking to him whether it was, whether I was talking to a killer or not. And it's certainly I'm not qualified to make that judgment as a reporter, but also I'm reminded of the many instances in which that assumption turns out to be wrong. I'm thinking about Richard Jewell, for instance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's possible that he just is the kind of guy who inserts himself into what's going on around him and becomes a focal point of attention without actually having really anything to do with it.
Sure. Both are as likely.
And we just don't know.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, this is something that I couldn't find in the materials that I had been reading and watching was, so aside from Shannon, that doesn't fit the profile of the other bodies that were found so much, the individuals who were wrapped in burlap, or even the ones that, I guess for a visual, we're thinking of, it's the middle of the night, a car pulls up, someone gets out, they unload the wrapped body from the car, and then they just start walking into the marsh. Is there any theory or observation or ideas about where that individual would have entered the marsh from? Or were they just basically stopping on the side of the road, wherever, walking straight into the marsh, dropping the victim, and then heading back to their car? Or are there entrances that you have to use in order to even get into that thicket?
I think they were getting back in their car and driving away. There are people who say, that on the other side of that marsh is a body of water, is, the Long Island Sound, and that maybe the guy's a clammer or is a boater of some sort, which might explain the burlap issue as well, and that the killer accessed it that way. To me, the simplest explanation, particularly since those first four women were pretty near the edge of the bramble and not really far from the shoulder of the highway, was that the person in the middle of the night pulled over, dropped a body, drove another 1/10 of a mile, and did it 3 more times, and then just kept on going. It's a very straight highway, and it's pretty desolate. This is not like the Long Island Expressway where there's always a million cars on it. You know when you're alone on this highway because it's a straight shot, and you can see headlights coming from miles away. So he would know whether it's safe to pull over and toss remains aside and keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, this case, I think for me, as I was doing a little bit more prep last night, I opened up Google Maps, and being so far away, you really have this idea of you want to be on the ground and see what it looks like for all of these reasons that we just asked, to sort of help us think about how this could actually play out, which helps us, think that we know who that is then, because, is this a roadway in which truckers, long haul truckers drive down? I don't know, but I know that's also been theorized. But whenever we talk about a place and wanting to know what it's like, what we're really asking ourselves is, who is the person responsible for this, and how could they have done this?
It's weird. It's weird because it's a 4-lane divided highway, but it really is a local road.
Okay.
You would use it to access, the South Shore communities of Long Island, which include like the Hamptons. So,
right.
Where Jerry Seinfeld has a place or whatever. But it's not as far out as there. And so, Manhattanites might know it as, or New Yorkers who have a car might know it as what they drive through to get to the Hamptons. Okay. And they might even be surprised to hear that there are homes along the highway because you can't really see them.
I see.
Or that there are local beaches like Oak Beach, or Cedar Beach or Gilgo Beach. Those were things that, I'd been in New York for 20 years. I hadn't heard of those places because you don't stop along that highway. So it's weird. It's both a big road, but also desolate.
Gotcha. So very recently, within the last couple of weeks, the Suffolk County Police Department held a press conference, and they released photos of a belt. The photo is kind of the only thing that they released. There wasn't a ton of information, where they found it, what time, really nothing to give us how this fits into the investigation. What are your thoughts on the timing of the press conference, and what do you make of the evidence? Because this press conference was also the same day that the trailer for the film Lost Girls was dropped. So I'm interested to know your thoughts.
I think that it was a tactical decision to have that press conference and to announce the belt. And I don't mean that in a negative way necessarily. Sure. I just think that it does a couple of things to let people know about that belt. The first is that thing that I think people need to know is that they have had the belt for years. And so they're making the decision to go public with it now, perhaps because they're at a dead end and they think that they actually might lead to something, but also perhaps that they want to send a message that they are still actively pursuing the killer. And it's very possible that they're trying to look busy because they know a movie is coming, although I'm not sure if they necessarily knew that the trailer was coming that exact day, but that would be pretty savvy of them.
Yeah, it sure would.
And, maybe it's a mixture of it all because, goodness knows they need to continue to be taking action. And so no matter what the reason, it's a good thing that they're out there and trying to, get attention for the case. And perhaps even this lead might lead to something. It's a little dispiriting that they would sit on something like this for 9 years before making the decision to check around and go public with it. But, in the night before when they announced that they were going to have a press conference, I immediately thought of the last time this happened when they, produced another piece of physical evidence to try to identify an unidentified victim. And I thought, well, maybe that's what this will be. And it turned out it was something like that.
Yeah, so the belt we're speaking about, the investigators believe it to belong to the suspect, and it is embossed with 2 letters with, depending on which way you hold up the belt, either looks like WH or HM. So, obviously, if you look at the photos, it's could be incredibly identifiable, and to think they're sitting on it for, who knows, 9 years or so. I'm glad that they did. I hope it does reveal something, but it seems like it's been very tight-lipped on what to release. But when you have a case that's been going on for so long, you have to take a few risks here and there and release something to generate interest. So,
I was going to ask, in reviewing the materials, it looks they really in the A&E documentary put a lot of emphasis on the conflict between the various investigators, certainly the chief of police
and the DA,
and they make a point of saying that both of them were they were both from different political parties, and they kind of used that. They were sort of positioning themselves against each other in order to bolster their ability to get reelected. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. I mean, has any of that resolved in the years that have passed? Is at least for whatever is not being spoken about, do you get a sense that everybody's on the same page? Whether they're moving quickly or efficiently or not, are they still on this? Are they just on the same page of working together?
Yeah, the landscape has changed over there. I mean, but historically, the Suffolk County Police has had real corruption problems in the distant past and during the period that this case broke. There was one senior member of the department who kept rising in the ranks, named James Burke, who ended up being put in prison by the feds. He was corrupt and also violent, and beat up a suspect. And that would be, that would seem run of the mill if not for the fact that the DA was also protecting him and keeping that information private. And the DA eventually went down because of that as well. He went out of office. So that DA is no longer around. James Burke is no longer around. There is a new police commissioner. In fact, there are several new police commissioners. Perhaps I should have mentioned when we were talking about the belt, Geraldine Hart is the new police commissioner of the Suffolk County Police Department. And it's possible that this press conference happened because she wanted to do something different from what her predecessors did, saying, I don't know why they didn't go public with the belt, but we should go public with the belt.
Okay.
So, maybe it's just a fresh set of eyes being put on the case. But the real big thing that I think your listeners should take away from all this talk of corruption in Suffolk County is that for many, many years, the FBI was really at arm's length on this case. They offered a little bit of technical assistance early on, but that was it. And what a lot of people suspect, and in one news report even suggested, is that it was the corruption. It was James Burke who kept the feds away because he didn't want them seeing what he was up to.
Yeah.
And to me, would be a tremendous tragedy if that were true. It has always been a mystery why the FBI wasn't involved sooner. This definitely involves cases that go across state lines. A lot of these women are from other places. It seems like a natural for them. And that to me is a real tragedy.
That absolutely is, and fascinating. Now I want to even deeper dive into that particular phenomenon. So thank you for explaining that a bit.
Do you know if in more recent years if the FBI has been able to offer consultation work from their behavioral analysis unit?
Yes, Geraldine Hart's immediate predecessor, a fellow named Sini, he brought the FBI in. So the FBI's been helping apparently for at least a year or two.
Great. Well, so speaking of the film, the book Lost Girls has been adapted into a film directed by Liz Garbus, who just had tremendous success with Who Killed Garrett Phillips on HBO and is known for being a documentarian. Premiered at Sundance this past week. Were you able to be there for that?
I was. Netflix was nice enough to invite me, and I went.
What was that like?
Yeah. It was fun. I took part in the Q&A afterward. People had questions about the case, so I answered one question. But what was exciting was to see, the film. Liz is wonderful, but to see the entire cast so invested in this case and so hopeful that it might lead to public attention, and perhaps even to movement in the case. I mean, one thing they kept that I know Liz has been talking about is the late Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. How that book came out about the Golden State Killer and how the visibility about the case that she brought to it both before and when the book was published, suddenly, shortly after the book was published, they had an arrest and a conviction in that case. And so she was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if, whether it was the belt or whether it was anything else, this movie helping to raise attention might lead to some movements in this case.
Oh, we can.
And of
let's
course,
hope,
I think
yeah.
everyone hopes that. So there was. It's of course a very, sad movie. It matches the tone of the book in many ways, which I'm really very grateful for. It talks about the issues surrounding these women's lives and their families' lives, and that I think is something I'm extraordinarily grateful for. But also there was hope at the screening that perhaps, now that we're all paying attention, something more can happen for these victims.
Well, it just seems like the zeitgeist is shifting over the last few years, that we're finally really, really looking at what a problem this is across the board. I mean, Shiloh and I have talked about Indigenous women who continue to disappear at incredibly high rates, and that population is marginalized because they're not. Because it's just not thought of as important to figure this out in the same way that we see over and over again, especially in this case, that law enforcement marginalized these sex workers, and like you were saying, kind of shrugged their shoulders. Oh well, they just decided to drop off the radar for a while, or that's what they do, just making a lot of assumptions about each of these victims.
Yes, and Killing Season, the A&E documentary series that you guys mentioned earlier, that they did a good job with this too, talking about truck stop victims. Right. And just how there might be a whole unreported trend of missing people who are actually serial killer victims.
Absolutely.
And they make this very strong case that there's a whole cohort of society that law enforcement is just overlooking, and that we as a society are just overlooking.
Yeah, absolutely. So the film is going to premiere on Netflix March 13th. I'm very excited for it. I think seeing Amy Ryan in this role as Shannon Gilbert's mom, Mary, is just I'm just so interested to see that, because she's so great. I'm used to seeing her in something light, like The Office. I wanted to get your thoughts, and speaking about Mary Gilbert and her death in 2016, she died at the hands of another daughter, Sarah Gilbert, who clearly had a lot of mental health issues going on, and she was eventually convicted of second-degree murder. But how did that impact you? Because I know with all of these women's families, you really spent a good deal of time with them. I mean, it had to be incredibly shocking, but also what was it like just hearing that news?
It was horrible. I mean, it was just horrible to hear. I mean, Mary I would describe her as one of the most dynamic people I've ever met, and certainly among the people who I interviewed for this book, that she was the loudest, the most unpredictable, and also the most productive in terms of getting public attention brought to this case. And when the folks who optioned the book discussed the possibility of making this a movie about her, I thought I had two reactions. The first was, I never would have thought of that in a million years. And the second was, what a great idea, because she really helps, bring together all the issues of the book and helps sort of personify all the struggles that all the families had. But in reporting the book, I really was talking to her and also to her daughter, Cherie. She had 4 daughters in all, including Shannon, and Cherie was the one I really talked to. Sarah, who developed schizophrenia and ended up murdering her, was someone who I would see in the background, but I didn't really talk to at all because she was keeping to herself. But apparently in the years after Shannon's body was found, she started to have a series of psychotic breaks and became really dependent on Mary and on the rest of her family. And it was during one of those psychotic breaks that she ended up killing Mary. But what I learned after Mary's death was that Mary had really spent the last 3 or so years of her life since Shannon's remains were found. She really spent it doing 2 things. And the first was fighting on behalf of Shannon to get Shannon's case recognized as a homicide, to help bring more attention to the case, to try to solve the broader mystery. And then the second thing she did was really spent her time trying to help Sarah. taking care of Sarah's child when Sarah couldn't, helping her in and out of hospitals.
Which is an incredibly stressful experience for a parent of an adult child with mental illness. Is just a lot of people just don't understand how much work that is.
Right. And of course, Sarah, like a lot of people, was not staying on her meds necessarily. She had an injectable. She had Haldol that she was supposed to take every 4 weeks. And at the end, she hadn't taken it. So her storyline sort of follows the storyline of a lot of people who decline in mental illness because they have trouble with compliance. And the worst possible thing happened, yet again. So it's just astonishing even to think about it.
It is.
I do end up writing about it. There's an extra chapter and afterward to Lost Girls in the latest edition that sort of turns the lens on Mary a little bit and on her final years, because I thought, she certainly deserves the attention, and also perhaps people who see the movie might want to know more about what happened to Mary at the end.
I think that's a great way to sort of pair all of that up. Thank you for giving us a little bit more insight into what she was like one-on-one, and I'm so happy this film is going to be able to highlight her strengths and all the work that she's done for all these women. So you have a new book coming out in April of this year. It's called Hidden Valley Road. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
This book is another family saga. Instead of being about 5 families, it's about one. And it's a family who, their children were in the baby boom. They were born in the late 40s through the early 60s. They had 12 children, and 6 of them developed schizophrenia. At a time where most people were denying that their kids had mental illness, and when there was too large of a stigma to really seek out help. And so the family experienced, a lot of tragedy, and then they became studied by the National Institute of Mental Health and by more than one pharmaceutical company and by a university in Colorado, all people who are trying to isolate the genetic roots of schizophrenia. And so the family sort of becomes a test for trying to cure the disease, and also the story of the way that we understand mental illness in the United States toward the end of the 20th century. But mostly it's a family saga. What makes it, I think, a helpful book and an interesting book is that I was able to interview absolutely everybody in the family who is still alive.
Wow.
To get everyone's perspective.
That's amazing.
Most of the time when people read books about mental illness, they're memoirs of one person's struggle or of their talking about their uncle or their mother. Whereas here you have, sort of everybody in the family talking about it, both sick and well.
Well, that is right up our alley. Sounds so incredible.
I cannot
fascinating.
Wait. Yeah.
So we'll be sure to look for that in the spring when it comes out. I just want to let folks at home know as we're wrapping up here that you can find all of Bob's works and further information on his website, which is robertkolker.com. And then you're on Twitter and Instagram at bobkolker.com, correct? I'm sorry, just that, Bob Kolker, not a .com at the end.
That's right. Perhaps I should make it easier, but yeah, I'm robertkolker.com on the internet, and then Bob Kolker on Twitter.
Oh, you're easy to find. So, well, this has been great.
Can I ask him one question?
Oh, yeah. Please.
No. I'm just like, this just popped up, and if you have an answer to it, I'm just wondering what your feelings are with this particular case and other cases that are increasingly becoming crowdsourced. One of the examples that's sort of in the milieu right now is Don't Fuck with Cats, the documentary where really the identity of the killer and the tracking of the killer was performed and executed by a number of people working in tandem from around the world, just accessing open source databases. And, what are your feelings about that? And, or do you see any problems with that?
That's a wonderful question. In the case of the Long Island serial killer, there were a million armchair detectives all sort of doing work, and a lot of them communicating together, mainly on web sleuths. And there were a couple of theories of the case that really held sway for a long time. And I was working on the book for a while, for a year or more. And so I was paying close attention to what was happening on the internet as people were researching the case. And I would start to see lots of different trends happen. First of all, I would see newcomers coming in who would ask the same questions that were asked 6 months ago. And then the people who had been at this for 6 months would get impatient and angry with them. And so there's a lot of knowledge on the internet. There's a lot of, it's not like everybody gets together like a CSI episode and solves the mystery in 10 seconds. There's a lot of mixed signals, a lot of people who who don't understand something that everybody else understands, and then they end up making stupid theories, and then those stupid theories get picked up by other people and warped. And then also there's a lot of misinformation that gets accepted as fact, and nobody has really acted to confirm it. So those are the problems with it. But of course, the good things about it is that there are people who are able to access public information and really, come up with perspectives that nobody else has that really help lead to an understanding of the case. In terms of Oak Beach and this case, there was a lot of looking at the weather, and a lot of aerial maps, a lot of physical data that was, from the internet, and a lot of great information came from that.
Oh,
so it's a mixed bag.
It seems like
a mixed bag.
It seems like it's both. It's really both extremes. On one hand, you can get really kind of amazing information from people who were doing a deep dive in one particular area, but you really helped me understand, because I just always thought about people making incorrect assumptions, but you've illuminated about that sort of the hierarchy that happens within these groups, where the old guard has been there for months and they know everything, backwards and forwards, and then a noob comes in and misinterprets something, but then creates that misinterpretation, has its own life that can then get in the way of the real investigation. So thank you for illuminating that.
Yeah, and it happens over and over again. Let's say a year ago, somebody says, "Hey guys, look at this." And then everybody takes 3 months talking about it. And at the end of the 3 months, everybody who's talking about it agrees that it's nothing. And then a year later, somebody new will pop up and go, "Hey guys, what about this?"
Yeah.
And
No,
that's
that's a perfect way to visualize it. Thank you.
But there are also the people that have the luxury of time that, maybe a detective doesn't have.
Yep.
And if you have someone coming home and jumping on their computer and just diving into it, I go back and forth as well. I'm all for it in some aspects, and others, I see how it could run down a really sort of wicked rabbit hole. And like with the Delphi case, people throwing up pictures of people alongside the sketch, and it's like, whoa, let's not be naming and throwing pictures up on the internet. Such interesting stuff. Bob, we want to thank you so very much for just giving us really some personal insight into your journey and this case that I think it's wonderful that it's going to be back in the spotlight and highlighting the importance of everything, the direct victims, the indirect victims, and that there's still a lot of work to do. But we appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thank you both for your interest in this case and for the chance to talk about it.
Absolutely.
And we can't wait to see you. We'll see you in 2 months?
Where?
Is it at CrimeCon?
Are you going to CrimeCon, Bob?
Oh, I don't think I am.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, hopefully we can meet in person one day. We're trying to get ourselves to New York for some things. Feels like we're going everywhere else but New York this year. But, well, thank you so much for the interview. And for our audience, we will talk to you next time on LA
Not So
Confidential. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.